On a cold morning in April 1797, on the small Caribbean island of St. Vincent, British soldiers moved through Garifuna villages with rifles and bayonets. Men, women, children, none were spared. Over 5,000 people were rounded up and marched to waiting ships. Their crime? Existing. The British called them Black Caribs, a dangerous race that refused to be governed. They had resisted colonization for 150 years, sheltering escaped slaves, maintaining their independence, and refusing to bend to European rule. So Britain made a decision. These people would be removed from the Caribbean entirely, deported to a barren island off the coast of Honduras where they were expected to die. But something unexpected happened. The Garifuna didn't die. They rebuilt. Today, they number over 600,000, spread across Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and major cities in the United States. And their DNA tells a story that shouldn't be possible. A story of a people created by shipwreck, forged by resistance, and preserved through centuries of attempted erasure. When geneticists analyze Garifuna DNA today, they find something that doesn't match any other population in the Americas. The genetic profile shows 75 to 85% West and Central African ancestry. But unlike other African-descended Caribbean populations, Garifuna carry 15 to 25% Indigenous American ancestry. That's not unusual by itself. Admixture happened throughout the Caribbean. What's unusual is the pattern. The indigenous component comes exclusively through maternal lines. Mitochondrial DNA, haplogroups A2 and C1, markers of indigenous Caribbean peoples, appear in up to 46% of Garifuna individuals. But the Y chromosome lineages, passed from father to son, are overwhelmingly African. Haplogroup E1B1A, characteristic of West and Central African populations, dominates the paternal lines. This creates a genetic signature found nowhere else in the Caribbean. African fathers, indigenous mothers, maintained consistently across multiple generations. Every other mixed population in the Americas shows random admixture patterns, genetic contributions from both sides distributed more evenly. The Garifuna show sex-biased admixture so extreme that it can only mean one thing. The founding population consisted of African men who systematically married indigenous Caribbean women, and those unions created something entirely new. So how did this happen? To answer that, we need to go back to 1635, to a slave ship wrecking off the coast of St. Vincent, and to the moment when survivors made a choice that would echo in DNA for 4 centuries. Around 1635, somewhere in the Lesser Antilles, a Spanish slave ship carrying captives from West Africa ran into a storm. The ship broke apart near St. Vincent, one of the Windward Islands. According to historical accounts, the Africans aboard, many from the Ibibio ethnic group of modern Nigeria, survived the wreck and reached the island. They weren't enslaved by the island Caribs who lived there. They weren't killed, they were absorbed into the society. The island Caribs, also called Kalinago, had their own reasons for welcoming these survivors. They were locked in a struggle against European colonization. French and English settlers were encroaching on their islands. Spanish raids captured their people for slavery. The Caribs needed allies, and these African survivors, many of whom had military experience or had resisted enslavement, brought skills the Caribs valued: fighting ability, knowledge of European tactics and weapons. But most importantly, they brought population. Caribbean indigenous populations had been decimated by disease and warfare since Columbus arrived in 1492. By the 1600s, island Carib communities were small and struggling. The arrival of African survivors offered a chance to rebuild demographic strength. But here's what's crucial. The integration wasn't random. Island Carib society was matrilineal. Kinship, property, and status were traced through mothers. When African men married into Carib families, they were absorbed into existing kinship networks. Their children were raised in Carib households, learning Carib language and customs from their mothers. But they carried their father's African Y chromosomes. Within 2 or 3 generations, this pattern crystallized. A new population emerged, speaking an Arawakan language inherited from Carib mothers, practicing a blend of African and Caribbean spiritual traditions, and identifying as neither fully African nor fully indigenous. They called themselves Garifuna. By 1700, the Garifuna population on St. Vincent numbered several thousand, and they had become a problem for European powers. They refused to submit to colonial authority. They maintained military alliances with French settlers against the British. They sheltered Maroons, escaped slaves from nearby islands like Barbados and Martinique, who fled to St. Vincent seeking freedom. British records from the 1700s describe the Garifuna with fear and contempt. Ungovernable, warlike, too mixed to be trusted. The British distinguished between yellow Caribs, island Caribs with minimal African ancestry, and black Caribs, the Garifuna, with visible African features. The distinction was deliberate. British colonial law treated people differently based on appearance. Yellow Caribs could sometimes negotiate with authorities as indigenous peoples. Black Caribs were classified as people of African descent, which in the Caribbean meant they were assumed to be escaped slaves or rebels. The classification justified treating them as enemies of the state. Throughout the 1700s, tensions escalated. The Garifuna controlled the most fertile parts of St. Vincent. They farmed, fished, and traded throughout the Lesser Antilles. British planters wanted that land for sugar plantations, but the Garifuna refused to sell or leave. In 1795, war erupted. The Second Carib War. Led by their paramount chief Joseph Chatoyer, the Garifuna fought British forces for over a year. They used guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks from mountain strongholds, ambushes on British patrols. For months, it looked like they might win. But on March 14, 1795, everything changed. Chatoyer was killed in combat. Some accounts say he died in a duel with a British major. Others claim he was shot during a nighttime raid. Either way, his death broke Garifuna resistance. By October 1796, the remaining Garifuna fighters surrendered. What happened next was designed to be genocide. The British didn't just want to defeat the Garifuna, they wanted to erase them. Over 5,000 Black Caribs were rounded up between October 1796 and March 1797. They were held in a prison camp on Baliso Island, a tiny barren islet with no fresh water and minimal food. Disease swept through the camp: dysentery, smallpox, starvation. Hundreds died within weeks. British officials recorded the deaths in ledgers with clinical detachment: less to transport, fewer to feed. In March 1797, the survivors, maybe 2,500 people, were loaded onto British ships. They departed on March 11th, bound for Roatán Island off the coast of Honduras. The journey took 31 days, with a stop in Jamaica. One ship carrying 289 Garifuna sank during the voyage. No one recorded how many drowned. When the ships reached Roatán on April 12, 1797, only about 2,500 Garifuna had survived. That's half the number deported from St. Vincent. The British left them on Roatán and sailed away, expecting them to die. The island was uninhabited, arid, with poor soil and no infrastructure. It couldn't support 2,500 people. For months, the Garifuna starved, but then something remarkable happened. They negotiated with Spanish colonial authorities who controlled the mainland coast of Honduras. Spain was desperate for coastal defenders against British and pirate raids. The Garifuna had proven military skills. A deal was made. By May 1797, most Garifuna had relocated to Trujillo on the Honduran mainland. There, they were given land and employed as militiamen. They rebuilt their communities, established fishing villages, planted crops. Within 2 decades, their population had recovered and begun expanding. This is where the genetic preservation becomes extraordinary. Despite forced displacement, mass death, and settlement in a foreign land, the Garifuna maintained their genetic distinctiveness. Modern DNA studies reveal why. The Garifuna practice high endogamy, marrying primarily within their own communities. Even after spreading across Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, they maintained cultural and genetic boundaries. Their language, music, and traditions reinforced group identity. And crucially, they remembered. They remembered St. Vincent. They remembered the deportation. They remembered that they were different. That memory, passed from grandmother to granddaughter, preserved not just culture, but genetic patterns. When a Garifuna woman taught her daughter their history, she was also teaching her who to marry, how to maintain identity, why their community mattered. That cultural transmission protected genetic distinctiveness for over 200 years. Modern genetic analysis shows patterns that confirm this preservation. Garifuna from Honduras, Belize, and Guatemala all show similar genetic profiles, indicating they descend from the same founding population deported in 1797. There's minimal genetic drift between communities, despite geographic separation. The matrilineal indigenous markers persist at consistent frequencies. The African Y chromosome lineages cluster into specific haplogroups that trace back to West and Central African ethnic groups. Oral traditions and genetic evidence both point to origins from the Afik, Igbo, Fon, Ashanti, Yoruba, and Congo peoples. But the genetic evidence reveals something history books missed. The Garifuna show modest European ancestry, about 5 to 12%, concentrated in specific lineages. This likely came from French settlers who allied with the Garifuna on St. Vincent, or from Spanish colonial officials on the Honduran coast who married into Garifuna families. The admixture is minor but detectable, adding another layer to an already complex genetic history. Today, geneticists can identify a Garifuna genetic signature with remarkable precision. When someone takes a commercial DNA test and sees Indigenous Caribbean ancestry combined with West African lineages in a specific ratio, Algorithms flag it as potentially Garifuna. The pattern is so distinctive that companies like 23andMe have created specific reference populations for Garifuna ancestry. But here's what's fascinating. Thousands of people are discovering Garifuna ancestry without knowing their family history. In New York City, Los Angeles, Houston, people who thought they were African American or Latino suddenly find this unique Caribbean signature in their DNA. How did it get there? Through a hidden diaspora. Starting in the 1940s, Garifuna began emigrating from Central America to the United States seeking economic opportunities. Many settled in port cities, working as merchant marines or in shipping. Others moved inland for factory work. But they often assimilated into existing Black or Hispanic communities, not identifying publicly as Garifuna. Their children grew up American. Many didn't learn Garifuna language or traditions. Some didn't even know their parents or grandparents were Garifuna. The cultural identity faded, but the genetic markers remained. Now DNA testing is revealing this hidden heritage. Geneticists estimate that 100,000 or more people in the United States carry Garifuna ancestry, though only a fraction identify as Garifuna. The genetic signature appears in unexpected places, in Belizean Creole populations who mixed with Garifuna communities, in Jamaican Maroons who share African origins, in Nicaraguan coastal communities where Garifuna settled, even in some Mexican populations along the Caribbean coast. Each instance represents a moment when the boundaries of Garifuna identity became permeable, when someone married out of the community, when genetic material crossed into other populations. But what makes the Garifuna truly unique isn't just their genetic profile, it's how they came to be. Most populations in the Americas formed through gradual admixture over centuries. European colonizers slowly mixed with indigenous populations and enslaved Africans, but the Garifuna crystallized rapidly, in perhaps 3 generations. From 1635 to 1700, they went from being shipwreck survivors and island Caribs to being a distinct people with their own identity. The speed of this ethnogenesis is unprecedented. And then they survived 2 attempted erasures. First, the British deportation designed to kill them. Second, the cultural assimilation pressures of living as minorities in Central American nations that often denied their indigenous identity because they looked African. Through both, they persisted. Their genes carry the evidence. Autosomal DNA from St. Vincent Garifuna shows median ancestry of 74.5% Sub-Saharan African, 4.6% Amerindian, and 11.8% European. But in Central American Garifuna populations, the Indigenous American component is elevated, reaching 15 to 25% in some communities. Why the difference? Because after settlement in Central America, some Garifuna communities had additional admixture with local indigenous groups. Miskito peoples on the Nicaraguan coast, Maya populations in Guatemala. This later mixing added to the indigenous ancestry already present from island Carib mothers. The result is that modern Garifuna are even more genetically complex than their founding population. They're a blend of West African, Caribbean indigenous, Central American indigenous, and European ancestries, configured in patterns found nowhere else on Earth. Their language confirms the genetic story. Garifuna, also called Garifuna or Garinagu, is an Arawakan language, not an African language with Caribbean influences, an indigenous Caribbean language with African influences. The grammar, the core vocabulary, the structure, all come from the Arawakan family spoken by island Caribs. But the phonetics, the rhythm, the intonation carry African influences. Linguists describe it as a Caribbean language spoken with an African accent. The language survived because it was transmitted mother to child, just like mitochondrial DNA. Carib women taught their children to speak Garifuna. Those children taught their children. For 400 years, the language passed through maternal lines, preserving grammatical structures even as vocabulary borrowed from French, English, Spanish, and African languages. In 2001, UNESCO recognized Garifuna language, music, and dance as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. The recognition acknowledged something geneticists had already proven. This isn't just a culture, it's a unique fusion that emerged from one of history's most unusual ethnic formations. But the Garifuna story isn't just about the past, it's about identity today. What does it mean to be Garifuna in the 21st century? Young Garifuna growing up in the Bronx, in Los Angeles, in Houston, are reclaiming their heritage. They're learning the language their grandparents stopped speaking. They're researching family histories. They're taking DNA tests and finding the genetic confirmation of stories they heard as children. They're discovering that their grandmother wasn't making things up when she said their family came from St. Vincent. The DNA proves it. and they're building communities around that shared heritage. Garifuna cultural centers in New York and Los Angeles offer language classes, music workshops, traditional cooking lessons. Annual celebrations on November 19th commemorate Settlement Day, the anniversary of Garifuna arrival in Belize. These aren't just cultural events, they're acts of resistance. Every Garifuna person who learns their language, who teaches it to their children, who maintains the traditions, is defying the British plan of 1797. The Empire tried to erase them. History forgot them. But DNA remembered. The genetic evidence doesn't just tell us where the Garifuna came from. It tells us how cultures survive. Through biological preservation, yes, but also through conscious choice. Through mothers teaching daughters. Through communities maintaining boundaries. Through memory passed across generations. The Garifuna are living proof that you can deport a people, kill half of them, and drop the survivors on a barren island expecting them to disappear. And they will still survive. They will rebuild. They will preserve their identity for centuries. And eventually, science will prove they were here all along, written in DNA that no amount of violence could erase. If you found this story of genetic mystery and cultural resilience fascinating, make sure to like this video and share it with anyone curious about hidden heritage. Have you discovered unexpected ancestry in your DNA results? Share your story in the comments below. We all carry history in our genes. The only question is whether we're willing to learn what those genes reveal about who we are and where we came from. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.